Now that I've delved into the topics of 3 of the 4 major cults of the ancient world, the stellar cult, the lunar cult, and the Saturnian cult, it is time to turn attention to the solar cult. This is a complex topic, and I plan to review several different authors on it. Modern-day Christians have, in fact, little to no understanding about how their religion is connected to and evolved from the solar cult. There are many excellent authors who have written about this, and I plan to review several of their works. The thesis of the book I'm going to be reviewing today. The book is called The Cult of Sol Invictus by G.H. Halsberghe. It was published in 1972. Is that the cult of Deus Sol Invictus had a tremendous influence on Roman religion from the 3rd century AD onward, an influence that is overlooked by most scholars. Halsberghe believes that this influence was of equal importance to that commonly attributed to the cult of Mithras. He provides evidence for his thesis as he describes both the importance of the Sol Invictus sun cult and describes its doctrines. Halsberghe believes that this cult has been little studied, but had a tremendous impact on both the political and religious life of the 3rd century AD. This was the cult of Sol Invictus, the invincible sun god. It originated in Syria and was imposed on Rome and the empire at the beginning of the 3rd century AD by the young emperor Elagabalus, and he reigned from 218 to 222 AD. The Syrian version of the god Sol, known in other religious traditions as Helios for Greeks, Ra for the Egyptians, Surya for the Hindus, and Mithra for the Persians, was called Sol Invictus Elagabalus. Included in the book, published by E.J. Brill in the Netherlands, are literary texts upon which the author's work is based. These include primary sources in both Greek and Latin, ranging from authors who lived in the 1st century BC to those who lived in the 5th century AD. Halsberghe begins by tracing the sun cult up to the 1st century of the Empire of Rome. From earliest times, autochthonous deities were worshipped by the people of Rome. The most significant of these gods were Janus, Jupiter, Mars, Quirinus, and Vesta. There were also lesser deities that were worshipped as well. One of these was Sol, the sun god, who was said to be the protector of fertility, health, and honesty. This sun god was called Sol Invictus, and worship of him goes all the way back to the 4th century BC. It was during the last decades of the Roman Republic, however, that the cult of Sol became more important. Even before the reign of Octavian Augustus, Mark Antony portrayed the sun god on his coins. It was the Emperor Augustus who decided to bring more importance to the ancient cults of the Roman people. Augustus dedicated several obelisks to the worship of the sun god, but it was the autochthonous Sol that was honored. This Sol was usually associated with Luna. At this time, there was not yet any connection with an Eastern sun god, and Sol Invictus did not play a prominent part in Roman religion. Nevertheless, he was considered to be all-knowing and the revealer of secrets. According to Tacitus, when the conspiracy against the Emperor Nero was discovered, the sun god was considered to have saved the emperor. Also, the Emperor Vespasian dedicated a huge statue to the sun god in 75 AD. Starting in the 2nd century AD, however, the situation began to evolve. During this time, Eastern sun worship began to influence Rome and its empire. What had previously been rare mentions of the ancient cult of Sol disappear at this time, as the legionaries of Rome came into contact with the followers of Sol Invictus Elagabalus, the unconquerable god of the sun. This god was seen to return from the night every morning as an eternal victor over the powers of darkness. The emperors of Rome found the qualities associated with this god to be extremely attractive because they symbolized great power. Eventually, they even saw themselves as companions of the sun god and demanded to be worshipped as such. They established a public sun cult and claimed to be descended from the sun god. The support of the emperors of Rome for the cult of Sol Invictus would ultimately prove very important in its rise to prominence in the Roman Empire. The most important religious center of the cult of Sol Invictus Elagabalus in Syria was Emesa. Rome had many troops stationed in this part of the empire, and many Syrian soldiers enlisted in the Roman army. Workmen and slaves who lived in the Roman provinces continued to practice their national cults. Easterners even began holding seats in the Roman Senate, and they too remained loyal to their native religion. Septimius Severus, who lived from 145-146 AD to 211 AD, was Roman emperor from 193 to 211. He founded a personal dynasty and converted the government into a military monarchy. During the rule of the Severide dynasty, the imperial family facilitated the spread of Eastern cults in general, and especially the cult of Sol Invictus. Septimius Severus had come into contact with Eastern philosophers who taught the supremacy of Sol Invictus Elagabalus as early as 179 AD, when he was commander of the North Syrian Legion. He was influenced also by his study of astrology, and he had also studied law in Rome. The descendants of Septimius Severus, called the Severi, did a great deal to further religious syncretism in Rome and its empire. The cult of Sol became a strong factor in both the political and religious life of the people of the empire. The old Roman Sol cult virtually disappeared from Rome. According to Halsberghe, though, at the beginning of the 3rd century, Mithraism was at its height. In Mithra's shadow, however, was the cult of Sol Invictus Elagabalus, which had started to attract followers. After a time, it became difficult to distinguish between the two cults. Nevertheless, their doctrines, though they shared some similarities, were different. The cults of the East were different from the earlier, primitive, autochthonous Roman religions. The Eastern cults had a unique ability to stir the emotions and feelings of their adherents. They worshipped celestial bodies and especially the sun because of its life-giving properties and connections to fertility. They stirred the masses of people because they appealed to the intellect, as well as promising followers a reward for being virtuous, punishment for wrongdoing, and a better life in the hereafter. The Emperor Elagabalus, however, sought to elevate the sun god Sol Invictus Elagabalus to the position of chief deity in Rome. However, though Elagabalus tried to place Sol Invictus above Jupiter and make all the other gods subservient, he was unsuccessful in doing so. This was largely due to his own behavior and character. Elagabalus, born Varius Avitus Bassianus, was able to rise to the position of Emperor of Rome largely due to the machinations of his grandmother, Julia Maesa, who was able to win military support for her plans. The young Varius, only 14 years old, held the office of high priest of the national sun god of Emesa, Sol Invictus Elagabalus. This was a hereditary title that belonged to his family. Varius' grandfather had served Sol Invictus before him. The military unit near Emesa declared in May of 218 AD that it was willing to accept the young Varius, and shortly after he was made emperor under the name of Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Varius, being the high priest of the sun god Elagabalus, then named himself Elagabalus. With this, a boy of 14 became emperor of the Roman Empire. In the words of the author, it was, quote, because he was beautiful and a priest. From that moment, the Roman world was governed by women of Emesa. The young emperor, who lived only for his god, Sol Invictus Elagabalus, wanted to oust Jupiter Optimus Maximus from first place in the religious tradition and put his sun god in that place. The Senate of Rome was forced to bow before this sun god and his high priest, both of whom were equally strange to everything Roman and Western. End quote. Where did the idea for this invincible sun god of Emesa originate? The author suggests it came out of ancient Canaanite culture, which viewed the nature of the god as the personification of the male principle and of fertile warmth. Thus, the sun god is the god who is the maker or creator. The young Elagabalus, who initially had been only a tool in the hands of female members of his royal family, began to act independently of them, especially with regard to religion. He proclaimed himself to be the servant and counterpart of his deity, Sol Invictus Elagabal. The religion he created around himself was steeped in Syrian tradition and unfortunately contained many practices that violated Roman customs. It was not well received, for example, that the emperor would wear only Asiatic clothing, necklaces, and bracelets, or that he, quote, celebrated the orgies of his god, and surrounded by the women and eunuchs of his harem, lived a life of lascivious debauchery, end quote. One of the fundamental principles of the Sol cult was to incorporate both the feminine and masculine principle in one single divine being. Elagabalus's habit of dressing in women's clothing and imitating women was frowned upon in Rome. Elagabalus showed no real concern for the well-being of Romans. Instead, he was entirely fixated on himself, his own pleasure and debauchery, and the festivals he sponsored in honor of the glorification of his god. Because his god was invincible, and he considered himself the god's companion, he saw himself in the same light as the unconquerable sun god. When he tried to implement reform of the Roman religion and place his god above all others in the Roman pantheon, this was not well received. Roman senators were made to offer incense and libations in honor of Sol Invictus Elagabal each time they opened a Senate session. Elagabalus required all those who had to make a public offering or perform a sacred act to pronounce the name of Sol Invictus Elagabal before that of any other deity, including Jupiter. He also established the first official temples of Sol Invictus Elagabal. Needless to say, his actions were seen as offensive and an affront, and a demonstration of outright disregard for Roman morals and customs. Elagabalus's goal was to combine all religions and make them subservient to the supremacy of his god, Sol Invictus Elagabal. He coordinated all the cults of the Roman Imperium in his effort to achieve this goal. By the early part of the 2nd century in Rome and other parts of the empire, the cult of Sol Invictus became dominant. In the second part of this book review and the conclusion, I will cover the author's take on the dogma of the Sol Invictus Elagabal cult and its continuation under the reign of the emperors Aurelian and Constantine.